How well you are able to communicate through business writing is central to your success as a professional. Although much is done digitally, the rules haven't changed. Even if you're sending something via email or online, you still have to follow the same rules and format that you would if you were doing a traditional type of writing. Traditional reports and letters are still hugely important to businesses. Even if they are submitted online or not, they still have to follow the same rules they always have. New venues such as Facebook and other social media employ different techniques, but can be just as important. Businesses use things like Facebook to market their products, to talk about different things that are coming up, to get customer feedback and be able to talk with their customers in real time. Mastering all aspects of business writing will have an impact on how others perceive your credibility and overall importance to a company. Written communication should do 4 things: adapt to the audience, make a good first impression, be effectively organized, and look professional. Adapting to the audience is very important because you have to make sure that your language and references are appropriate to those people. You can't use jargon or other types of language that lay people don't understand if they're the ones who you're targeting. So you need to really pay attention to who you're talking to and talk to them correctly. Research the readers to tailor the writing to them. You need to really look at who's going to be reading what you're writing and make sure that you're keeping it focused on them and their needs. A good first impression is important because it focuses on interests and the needs of the receiver. This means that you're tailoring it to them, you're making a good impression for your company and yourself, and by keeping your tone friendly but professional, you're not talking down to people, you're giving an impression of confidence and getting your message across. You need to get to the point quickly, make the key points obvious, because it's not pleasure writing, it is for a purpose. People are busy. Your impression needs to be that you are a business professional and you're getting your word out there without all the flowery extra language. You need to make sure you proofread everything because it is professional writing. Typos are not okay. You need to make sure that you're on top of things as far as that goes. Being organized is important, but using a greeting, a body, and a closing in professional writing works just as well as it does in creative writing. Like they say, you should tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. By repeating things like that, you're making sure your message is received correctly. You're making sure they know what you're trying to tell them. Just as important in creative writing as it is in business writing. Using bullets can be helpful. That can keep your ideas organized, keep the main points that you're trying to get across really highlighted. A proper length is important. You don't want your business writing to be too long. Again, it's not a novel, it's a letter, it's a report. It's something that is trying to do a very specific thing. And it needs to be clear and concise. Nobody wants to wade through a bunch of boring extra words when they're at work. You want to read it, know what you're supposed to do, get the message, and do what you need to do with it. Business writing needs to look professional. Use the correct format. Don't just throw a bunch of words on the page and hit enter and go, because that does not look professional. Even if you're using templates that come with your Office suite, that's better than just throwing it all in one paragraph and people have to try to wade through it all and find what you're trying to say. Use appropriate typeface. Don't go using crazy wingding fonts. Make sure that you don't use more than 2 fonts, and 11 or 12 point type is the right size. You don't want it too big unless it's for a heading. You don't want teeny tiny writing where people are squinting trying to read what you're saying. Don't use all capitals. Just like they say in social media, it just looks like you're yelling. Does not make your writing seem more important. It just looks dumb and unprofessional. Another important part of professional writing is to be accurate and correctly cite all of your sources. You should always have sources. They always need to be cited. You need to be accurate. You need to be honest. A lot of people, when they get down to the wire, end up kind of stretching the truth, exaggerating, putting facts in there and not quite knowing where they came from. You can't do that. It needs to be 100% accurate. Otherwise, if someone finds out that that's not accurate, it just makes you look stupid. And it doesn't do anything for you to look dishonest, especially when you're at work. Avoid rushing through that. That's a really important step. You need to make sure that you check and double check. Make sure that that source is a good source, not just something you pulled off of Wikipedia. You need to make sure it is a real, accurate source. Now, the most common types of business documents are letters, memos, proposals, brief reports, formal reports, and then blogs and social media. Now, letters are something that most people do know how to write. That when you're doing them professionally, they can be used as letters of application, reference letters, complaint letters, letters of acceptance, letters of inquiry, rejection letters, or acknowledgement letters. They are to be clear and brief. Again, no extra words, flowery, making it pretty. It needs to get to the point. You have to find the right balance between formal and informal because you don't want it to come off as reading a technical manual. It should still be friendly, even if you're writing, for example, you're writing a letter of rejection to a company. Say you work for a dentist office, and people have sent the sample of their dental equipment, their fluoride. They sent their fluoride to you. And you try out this fluoride, and it's more expensive than the company that provides it. You don't want to use it. So you're going to write a letter back to them saying, we're not really interested. We don't just want to say, dear such and such, your product is too expensive, we don't want it, and sign it. That's not professional, that's not a good way to do it. It should say something like, dear such and such, thank you for your product, we tried it out, but we think we're going to stay with what we have, it's working well for us now. We'll keep you in mind in the future. You're not going to slam doors on things that you might want to do later on. So it's important to kind of balance between being too formal or being too kind of off the cuff. You tailor the letter to the reader, just like you tailor to your audience if you're speaking. You need to know what kind of language to use. You want visual appeal. Use a standard format, like a block format that everyone learned about in high school. You can use that. It's still appropriate today, or you can indent, but definitely use a format. Don't just throw things all up there in one blob. Digital letters should be user-friendly and easy to read. You can embed links if there are things that may be interesting to whoever you're sending this letter to. That's perfectly acceptable. Just make sure they go somewhere. They're not dead-end links. You can, and you should always use a descriptive but a brief subject line. You don't want to say, this is a letter of recommendation for blah, 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 blah. Just nice brief subject line, but that says what it is so it doesn't get lost like spam. Now, the overall goal is to represent yourself and your company in a positive way, which kind of goes back to the don't sound too mean or curt or rude, but don't sound all flowery and unprofessional. Kind of strike a balance. Now, memos are probably the most common thing used in businesses. They're informal, they're brief, they're usually digital now. So this is something that's used often but can be used incorrectly. You don't want to use it for the wrong thing. It's usually to request information or an action, promote goodwill, like a congratulations for getting a promotion, something like that. Convey routine information or summarize a previous conversation. So it's short, sweet, to the point, kind of, I think of it like a Post-it note. It's just something small, but you still need to follow the right procedure in doing it to look professional. It's convenient, it's quick to prepare, it's quick to read. It has a single format. So you've got a heading with who you're writing it to, who it's from, the date and the subject, and then the body. That's all there is to it. It's not fancy. It just gets to the point. You can use bullet points if there's more than one thing you're talking about in your memo. You can number or use headings to separate the issues instead of bullet points. There's a lot of them, but there really shouldn't be if it's a memo. And you should be concise, but not too curt. Because again, you don't want to come across as rude and just barking out orders. It should be still written nicely. Now, proposals are important for obtaining new business. You have to follow directions. If there's a request for proposal from a company or whoever you're doing this proposal for, you have to follow those instructions correctly, carefully, to the letter, because you don't want your company to be dismissed just because you didn't quite check off all those checkboxes. Be clear in addressing the prospect's needs and tailor it to them. Don't just have some kind of blind little thing that you send out to everybody. It needs to be tailored to each person you're sending it to. You need to research and be organized when preparing the proposal. If you know the background of the company, if you know what they've had in the past, if you know what they're looking for, it's a lot easier to say, hey, this is what we can do for you. It's just the perfect match. You need to be concise. That's important for all of the things. You need to be to the point. People don't have time to just kind of sit around and leisurely read. They want it to the point. They want to know what they're going to do for them, how much it's going to cost, and how it's going to get done. Now, brief reports provide information about day-to-day operations. They're usually within a company. They're not sent out to outside companies. They keep departments on the same page when working on a project. That way, if people that are working in different departments are working on the same thing, they don't have contact daily. This kind of keeps them all on the same page, keeps them together so the project moves forward. They guide decision-making. They justify spending more money or resources. So if you're looking for more resources to be allocated to your department, this shows why, how, where it's going to go. They determine the scope and objectives. So it helps to kind of just keep the project moving along. What needs to happen next, how it goes. Consider your readers. The higher up the person is in the company that this report is going to, the shorter it should be, because the people that are higher up have less time. So more clear, more to the point. Show the value of the project. If you're trying to get money, if you're trying to keep a project going, you need to show what the value is and why it needs to be kept going. You need to write objectively, accurately, and concretely. Tell all sides of the situation. If there's problems with this project, you still need to talk about them and say how they're going to be resolved. Because just trying to hide problems will come back and bite you later. You need to deal with the problems. Choose one scheme, don't crowd the information. So when you're writing it, don't go all nuts with different fonts, different this. It all needs to be uniform. It needs to match. It needs to look professional. Formal reports report the status of a complex problem or issue and present a solution. So they're not just telling it, like a short report is telling them about one little aspect. The full report is telling you what's going on, telling you a problem, and it's still saying how it can be fixed. It's not asking for help, it's saying this is what we should do and trying to sell that idea. They usually rely on data, so you have to pay special attention to format and organization because they're more complex. These reports are long. They have a lot of dry data, stats. You need to make sure that you're paying attention to your format so things don't get lost. You have to use a title page, which has the name of the report, the author names and titles, the date, and sometimes the recipient that it's going to. There's also a transmittal letter, which is an overview of the contents, a table of contents, which has all the major headings, subsections, and page numbers. Just like in a book. That way it's easy to get where you need to get when you're trying to figure out what's going on with the company. An executive summary or abstract or synopsis. That's got a brief of the problem, the solution, and the backup of the solution. It's kind of a little preview of what's going to be in the report. And then the introduction has the background and outlines the objectives. It's a preview of what's to come. The body has a logical presentation of findings. So that's telling you what's going on with the problem. Your data is in there. And then your conclusions and recommendations are a summary of the findings and the proposed solutions. So that's where you say, okay, this is what's going on. This is how I know this is going on. And then in the conclusion, you say, this is what we do to fix this. And then at the end, you'd have an appendix that supports the content, but it would clutter the report if you put it in. So it basically is where you keep the questionnaires, your interview forms, anything you use to get the data. You put examples of those in there so people can see how you got this data and why you're saying this is the way to fix it. And then the bibliography sources, the sources that are cited in the text are listed in your bibliography. And that you need to follow the format of whatever writing style you're using, probably APA, and make sure that that's all done correctly. So if people want to look up your sources If they're like, that doesn't sound right, that says exactly where you got it from. They can look it up and go, oh, okay, I guess that is right. So that's, again, make sure that it's accurate. Don't just make stuff up. That's important. You have to use logical paragraphs so that it's coherent and smooth. You don't want to just kind of throw information that doesn't go together. It should be just like regular writing. Not just because it's professional doesn't mean it doesn't flow. You have to use signpost language like you do when you're writing any regular type of letter. Use words like first, second, and third, something to keep it moving, showing that it's all tied together. And then if it's appropriate, use graphics like graphs, tables, or illustrations. They can say more than words can if you do it correctly. So yeah, that's a big topic. Those are big, heavy-duty things that are not written in a day. That really requires a lot of organization because you don't want to lose your information. Blogs and social media. They can be used to promote products, services, and ideas. There's a lot of problem with people mixing professional and their social interaction on there. You need to be very conscious of what you're doing and keeping things professional if you're going to use it in that way. It's a good way to get feedback for a company. It's a good way for people to be able to tell you what they need, what they want. It gives you a little window into what your consumers are doing. That way you know where to go with your products or services. You can showcase your ideas visually. You're showing pictures, getting that information out there, developing communication. You can publicize events if you have trade shows or something coming up, depending on what your job is. You can also use it to provide links, so it's a good way to get more information out there and help service those customers and keep them coming back. Use headlines to attract attention. Write with the readers in mind. What's in it for them? I mean, they're looking at this probably just on their lunch break, clicking through things. Keep it interesting and make it relevant, because if it's relevant, they'll keep checking back and they'll be more interested. Pay attention to keywords. When people are typing things into search engines, I mean, think about what people might be clicking on or typing in, and put those keywords in so that when they type in things in a search engine, it will pull your page up. Use logic and figure out what any keyword that might be relevant to your company, put it in there, because then it will pull you up there. Keep it simple and brief. You don't want to be all wordy on social media. People have short attention spans. They are in it for a quick minute. So you need to make sure that it's simple, brief, get your message across, and that's it. Write like you talk. It's not a professional report. It shouldn't be formal, but keep your demographics in mind. It's okay to use slang. It's not a report. But make sure if your demographic is a 90-year-old demographic, you're not using slang, yo diggity or something, because they're not going to know what you're talking about. So you have to tailor it to who you're talking to, who is looking at your product. Now, when you're creating a business document, there are several steps. First, you need to determine your objectives and your audience. You have to be specific. You have to be realistic, and your objectives have to be achievable. Because if you're just pulling stuff out of thin air and saying, oh, it would be great if we could do this, and it's something that's never going to happen, there's no point. It has to be an achievable goal, and it needs to be tailored to the readers. You have to make sure that it's specific and it makes sense. And then next, you research and compile your facts and supporting data. You need to be thorough and accurate. The more facts and background and data that you have, the easier it is to sell your ideas, because you're showing that you have done the work, you know what you're talking about, and it's a lot easier to get your ideas out there. Next, you develop an organizational structure. You present the information in a clear and logical way. Present ideas in small units. That's actually called chunking, where you're putting things together in little bits of information. It's easy to comprehend. Facts don't get lost because they're all one little block here, one little block there. They all make sense together. They go together. It doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And then after you do that, you construct an outline to help organize your information. Get your outline done first. That way, when you go to write your report or whatever you're writing, it's all in order. You've thought about it. You can go back and click things around, get it exactly how you want before you start writing. Then you write a draft. Get your ideas down on the paper, because starting is the hardest part, but you worry about perfecting it later. Whip through it, get it out, just write. Just get it all out there. Doesn't matter if it's perfect. When you go back to revise it, that's when you worry about everything else. Revising it until it's clear and concise is the last step. You need to proofread it for grammar, spelling, and style. You can't just willy-nilly throw stuff out there. It needs to be correct. Make sure the tone is correct. Make sure you're not just talking down to people. If you know who your audience is, you know what balance to strike. You don't want to talk down to people, but you don't want to talk over their heads either. So you need to make sure that it's right. Sentences should be a readable length. Don't make extra long sentences to show how smart you are. If it's not read and comprehended, it's pointless. Eliminate unnecessary words and phrases. It's not creative writing. You're not writing poetry, you're writing a business report. Make sure that all of your paragraphs refer back to your thesis. If they don't, they're not relevant. If you need to make your thesis longer, do it. Make sure all your paragraphs relate to the main objective, and then double check all your facts, statistics, and quotes. Like I said before, you don't want that to come back to bite you later. You need to make sure that you're accurate. And then make sure all of your references are cited, because if you just have stuff in there and you don't have them cited in the end, then it's like you just made it up, even if you didn't. Use an active voice. That is actually something I learned about in this class that I hadn't really thought about. You need to make the subject of the sentence perform the action because it's more powerful than the other way around. If you do it that way, you're eliminating a lot of unnecessary words. You get rid of all the flowery language, and it actually just sounds better. So that's what my handout is about. It's the active voice versus the passive voice handout. It has examples. So if you refer to your handouts, the examples here. The passive is the lecture was given by Tom Servo. Now, passive, yeah, it says what it needs to say, but it's not real exciting. The active is Tom Servo gave the lecture. He did it. There it is. Active. Passive, these guidelines were established by the CEO. Active, the CEO established these guidelines. Can you see the difference? I mean, it sounds more powerful. It makes more sense. It's not just kind of lost. Passive is the seat on the opera board was filled by Robert Lee Marshall. Active is Robert Lee Marshall filled the seat on the opera board. He did it. That's active. So do you all understand what I'm saying with that? I mean, does it make sense? Yeah. So whatever you're writing, make sure that it's clear and to the point. Busy professionals don't have time to wade through flowery language and search for the objectives. It needs to be right out there for them, laid out clear. Business writing is not creative writing. It's not the same thing. You're not trying to make it sound pretty. You're not trying to just fill a page with words to get to your quota. You're getting to the point. Mastering these skills will ensure that your ideas will be heard. If you do not do things correctly, follow the steps, look professional, do what you need to do, your ideas just get lost in the shuffle. No one's going to hear them, no one's going to understand what you're trying to say, and you just fall behind. So effective business writing is a skill that directly correlates to professional success. If you're good at these things, if you take the time to do them correctly, if you make sure you do your research, then your ideas will be heard, you will move forward, and you won't just be lost in the shuffle.